For 42 nights, a man who controlled an empire watched the same woman walk into his mother's room at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. He never stopped her. He never spoke to her. And on the 42nd night, everything changed. The digital clock on Adrian Castellano's nightstand glowed 3 a.m. in pale blue light. The rest of the mansion slept beneath layers of silence and shadow. Outside, a cold October rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, beautiful and indifferent. Adrian sat alone in his private study, a half-finished glass of sparkling water untouched beside him. He wasn't reading the reports spread across his desk. He wasn't checking financial updates. His eyes remained fixed on a security monitor mounted on the wall. The same monitor he had been watching every night for 6 straight weeks. The camera showed the second-floor hallway outside his mother's bedroom. Empty. Quiet. Still. Adrian glanced at the clock again. 3 seconds later, a familiar figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Naomi Carter, 28 years old. Housemaid. Dark skin. Natural curls tied neatly behind her head. She moved carefully through the hallway, carrying nothing except a small cardigan folded over one arm. No one had summoned her. No one had requested her presence. Yet every night she appeared at the exact same time. Not 2:58. Not 3:02. Always 3 a.m. Adrian leaned forward slightly. The routine had become strangely familiar. Naomi stopped outside Evelyn Castellano's bedroom door. For a moment, she simply stood there listening. Then she slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Adrian's jaw tightened. 42 nights. 42 identical visits. And still he didn't fully understand why. Inside the bedroom, soft lamp light illuminated the walls. Evelyn Castellano sat upright in bed. Her silver hair was disheveled. Her hands trembled against the blankets. Even through the security camera's muted footage, Adrian could recognize the signs immediately. Fear, confusion, disorientation. His mother had once been the strongest person he had ever known. She had raised him alone after tragedy entered their lives decades earlier. She had taught him resilience, discipline, loyalty. Yet now, at 78 years old, Alzheimer's disease had stolen pieces of her one memory at a time. Some days she remembered his name. Other days she believed he was a stranger. But the hardest moments always arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning. Every single night. Doctors had explanations. Sleep cycles, cognitive disruptions, neurological patterns. Adrian had heard them all. None of their explanations changed anything. Because every night at 3, his mother woke terrified. Sometimes she searched for people who had been gone for 50 years. Sometimes she cried for her own mother. Sometimes she begged invisible visitors not to leave her behind. The medications helped very little. The specialists offered theories, but no solutions. Adrian had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars searching for answers. Yet somehow the one person making a difference was not a doctor, not a nurse, not a specialist. It was Naomi. On the monitor, Naomi approached the bed slowly. She never rushed. She never startled Evelyn. She simply sat in the chair beside her and waited. The elderly woman's frightened eyes found Naomi's face. Something changed almost immediately. The panic softened. The trembling eased. Naomi reached forward and gently draped the cardigan around Evelyn's shoulders. Then she smiled. A warm smile. The kind that couldn't be purchased or rehearsed. The kind that made people feel safe. Adrian had seen that smile 41 times before. Yet tonight something felt different. Naomi took Evelyn's hand between both of hers. The older woman's breathing gradually slowed. Then Naomi began to sing. Her voice was soft enough that the security system barely captured it. A simple melody. Slow, gentle, familiar. Adrian didn't know the song's name. He had never asked. But his mother always recognized it. Every single time. As the first notes drifted through the room, Evelyn's eyes slowly closed. The tension left her shoulders. The fear disappeared from her face. It was as if the music reached a place inside her mind that illness could not touch. Adrian stared at the monitor without blinking. 42 nights. 42 songs. 42 acts of quiet kindness performed when nobody was supposed to be watching. Except he had been watching. Every single one. And tonight, as Naomi continued singing beside the bed, Evelyn suddenly opened her eyes. She looked directly toward the doorway. Her expression changed. Her lips parted. Then she whispered something that caused Adrian's entire body to freeze. The glass beside him slipped from his fingers and rolled across the desk. Because for the first time in months, his mother had just spoken a name she should not have remembered. Adrian shot to his feet so quickly that his chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. His heart pounded against his ribs as he stared at the monitor. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. For a moment, he convinced himself exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But then his mother spoke the name again. Adrian. The word was barely above a whisper, fragile and trembling, yet it carried more weight than any conversation he had heard in months. Inside the bedroom, Naomi froze. Her eyes widened slightly before she looked toward Evelyn. The elderly woman's gaze remained clear. Not confused. Not lost. Clear. It lasted only a few seconds, but those few seconds felt miraculous. Adrian. Evelyn repeated softly. My boy. Tears instantly filled Adrian's eyes. He had spent nearly 2 years watching pieces of his mother disappear. First birthdays, then family stories, then entire decades of memories. Some mornings she asked him where her husband was, forgetting he had passed away nearly 30 years earlier. Other days she mistook Adrian for a delivery driver or a neighbor. The disease never followed rules. It stole whatever it wanted. Yet somehow, tonight, she remembered him. Naomi squeezed Evelyn's hand gently. He loves you very much, she said. Evelyn smiled faintly. The expression transformed her face, making her look younger, almost like the woman Adrian remembered from childhood photographs. I know, she whispered. Then the moment faded. The clarity disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Evelyn blinked several times and looked around the room with uncertainty. Where am I? She asked quietly. Naomi's expression never changed. No disappointment. No frustration. Only patience. You are home, Miss Evelyn, she answered softly. You are safe. Evelyn relaxed again against the pillows. Within minutes, her eyes drifted closed. Naomi continued singing. The melody flowed through the room like warm light on a cold morning. Adrian remained standing in his study long after the song ended. He could not stop replaying those few seconds in his mind. The next morning, sunlight poured through the mansion's enormous windows as staff members moved through their routines. Fresh coffee filled the air. Housekeepers polished surfaces. Gardeners worked outside despite the chilly weather. Everything appeared normal. Yet Adrian could think about only one thing. Naomi Carter. He found himself watching her from across the dining room. She moved SUA that afternoon. Adrian did something he almost never did. He asked questions. The request itself surprised everyone. His chief of staff nearly dropped a tablet when Adrian called him into the study. Tell me about Naomi Carter, Adrian said without looking up from the file on his desk. The older man blinked. The housemaid, sir? Adrian finally raised his eyes. There is only one Naomi Carter working in this house. Within an hour, a thin folder appeared on the desk. It contained employment records, references, tax documents, and a brief background check completed when Naomi had first been hired. Adrian expected something unusual, some hidden explanation, some obvious reason for her behavior. Instead, the file seemed remarkably ordinary. Born in Detroit, graduated from high school with honors, worked various caregiving and hospitality jobs. No criminal record, no disciplinary complaints, no lawsuits, no scandals, nothing extraordinary at all. Yet the more Adrian read, the stranger the mystery became. Ordinary people did not wake up every night for 6 straight weeks to comfort someone else's mother, especially not without being asked, especially not without receiving additional pay. That evening, Adrian found himself standing near the kitchen entrance as staff prepared dinner. The mansion buzzed with quiet activity. Pots simmered. Silverware clinked softly. Conversations drifted through the air. Naomi stood near a counter organizing fresh vegetables for the chef. Her movements were efficient and calm. She laughed quietly when one of the older cooks made a joke. The sound caught Adrian off guard. He realized he had never actually heard her laugh before. Most people became tense when he entered a room. Naomi did not even notice him standing there. Or perhaps she did, and simply chose not to react. For several seconds he watched her. Then something unusual happened. An elderly dishwasher accidentally dropped a tray of plates. The crash echoed through the kitchen. Several staff members jumped. Naomi immediately crossed the room. Not because anyone told her to. Not Beck. The following afternoon, Adrian made a decision that would have seemed ridiculous only a month earlier. He called for the head of household operations and requested access to Naomi's original employment interview notes. The request puzzled everyone. Household staff came and went. Adrian rarely remembered their names, let alone reviewed hiring records months later. Yet 20 minutes later, he sat alone in his study reading every page. Most of it was routine. Employment history, references, scheduling availability. Then one line caught his attention. Previous experience, family caregiving. Adrian read it twice. Family caregiving. Not nursing. Not professional healthcare. Family. The distinction mattered. He leaned back in his chair and stared through the window overlooking the lake. The autumn wind bent the trees along the shoreline. Somewhere in the mansion, Naomi continued her duties, completely unaware that the most powerful man in the house was trying to understand her. That evening brought another small surprise. Evelyn was having a difficult day. She did not recognize her bedroom. She insisted she needed to leave for work despite having retired decades earlier. Several caregivers attempted to reassure her, but nothing seemed to help. Eventually, Naomi entered carrying a tray with tea and crackers. She did not argue. She did not correct Evelyn. She simply sat beside her and listened. For nearly 20 minutes. Adrian watched from the doorway without interrupting. "Tell me about your job," Naomi said gently. Evelyn blinked. "I taught second grade." "That sounds important." A faint smile appeared on Evelyn's face. The children were wonderful. Slowly the anxiety faded. No confrontation. No complicated technique. Just patience. Adrian found himself wondering how Naomi always seemed to know exactly what to do. Later that night, the mansion settled once again into silence. The grandfather clock in the main hall marked each passing hour. 2 o'clock, then 2:30, then 2:55. Adrian was already sitting in front of the monitor. He told himself he was searching for answers. Yet each night the questions only multiplied. At exactly 3 o'clock, Naomi appeared. The hallway light cast a warm glow across the polished floor beneath her feet. As she reached Evelyn's door, something unexpected happened. A folded piece of paper slipped from her pocket and drifted to the floor. Naomi quickly picked it up, glancing around to make sure nobody had seen. But Adrian had. She unfolded the paper briefly before placing it back into her pocket. The security camera could not show the words, only a glimpse of aged paper worn soft from years of handling. A letter, or perhaps a photograph. Something personal, something important. Naomi entered the room and closed the door behind her. The familiar song soon followed. Soft, steady, comforting. Yet Adrian barely heard it tonight. His attention remained fixed on that folded paper. Because for the first time since this mystery began, he had seen evidence that Naomi carried something with her every single night. Something she never showed anyone. Something connected to those silent prayers, those 3 o'clock visits, and the sadness that occasionally crossed her face when she thought nobody was watching. The mystery finally began to crack 3 days later. Adrian had never been a man who enjoyed invading another person's privacy. Control, discipline, observation, those were different. But curiosity had become impossible to ignore. He needed answers. Late that afternoon, he requested a more complete background review. Not because he distrusted Naomi. Quite the opposite. Nothing about her behavior suggested dishonesty. That was precisely what troubled him. People usually wanted something. Recognition, security, opportunity, advancement. Yet Naomi seemed driven by something entirely different. The expanded report arrived just before sunset. Adrian opened it while the last golden light of the day stretched across his desk. Most of the information repeated what he already knew. Then a supplemental note caught his attention. Family history. Adrian read the first sentence and felt his chest tighten. Naomi Carter had spent nearly 5 years caring for her mother at home. 5 years. While working jobs. While paying bills. While managing responsibilities most people would struggle to balance. He continued reading. Her mother had suffered from progressive cognitive decline, memory loss, confusion, nighttime distress, symptoms painfully similar to Evelyn's. Adrian slowly lowered the file. Suddenly dozens of small details began fitting together. The patience, the calm voice, the ability to redirect fear without confrontation. The songs, the gentle reassurance. Naomi was not guessing what Evelyn needed. She had lived through it before. He stared out the window toward the darkening lake. For the first time, he stopped viewing Naomi as an employee performing an unusual kindness. Instead, He saw someone carrying an old wound. Someone who understood his mother's fear because she had already watched the same struggle unfold inside her own family. That night arrived colder than the ones before. Wind rattled the branches outside the mansion. By 3 o'clock, Adrian was once again watching the security monitor. Naomi appeared in the hallway as expected. The folded paper remained tucked inside her pocket. When she entered the bedroom, Evelyn was already awake. The older woman looked frightened. Her hands twisted nervously in the blanket. Naomi immediately sat beside her. "Bad dream?" she asked softly. Evelyn nodded. "Everybody keeps leaving." The words hung in the room. Simple. Heartbreaking. Naomi reached into her pocket and removed the folded paper Adrian had. Noticed days earlier. Carefully she opened it. It was not a letter. It was a photograph. The camera angle prevented Adrian from seeing the image clearly, but he watched Naomi smile at it for a brief moment before placing it on the nightstand where only she could see. Then she began singing. The melody seemed different tonight. More personal. More emotional. Halfway through the song, Adrian noticed something unexpected. Naomi's eyes glistened. She blinked several times as though fighting back tears. Yet she never stopped singing. Never lost the melody. Never allowed Evelyn to see her sadness. For several long seconds, Adrian forgot to breathe. Because in that moment, he realized something that changed everything. Naomi was not simply helping his mother heal. Every night at 3 o'clock, she was healing something inside herself as well. The next morning, Adrian could not stop thinking about the photograph. During meetings, his attention drifted. During phone calls, he found himself staring through windows instead of listening to reports. By lunchtime, he finally gave in to a realization he had been resisting for weeks. This was no longer simple curiosity. He cared, not only about what Naomi was doing, but about why. For the first time since his mother's illness began, someone had succeeded where experts had failed. Yet Naomi never spoke about it, never sought praise, never mentioned the countless hours she gave away in the darkness while everyone else slept. That afternoon, Adrian walked through the east garden behind the mansion. Autumn leaves covered the stone pathways in shades of gold and crimson. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth. As he rounded a corner near the greenhouse, he spotted Naomi sitting alone on a bench during her break. She held the same photograph in her hands. Adrian immediately stepped back before she noticed him. He was not a man who eavesdropped. Yet something about her expression stopped him. Naomi smiled at the photograph for several seconds. Then she carefully traced one finger across its surface. Not with sadness, with affection, with longing. Before Adrian could decide whether to approach, Naomi folded the picture and slipped it back into her pocket. When she stood, the smile vanished. The familiar calm mask returned. She walked back toward the mansion carrying herself with quiet dignity. That night, the temperature dropped into the low 40s. Wind whispered against the windows. At 2:59 a.m., Adrian was already watching the monitor. 1 minute later, Naomi appeared. As always. But tonight something felt different. She seemed distracted. Her steps were slower. Her shoulders slightly tense. When she entered Evelyn's room, the elderly woman was already awake, staring toward the ceiling. "Could not sleep?" Naomi asked gently. Evelyn turned her head. "I was waiting." Naomi smiled. "Waiting for what?" Evelyn looked directly at her. "For the singing girl." Adrian felt something tighten inside his chest. Naomi laughed softly. The sound filled the room with warmth. "Well, the singing girl is here." Evelyn reached for her hand. "You remind me of someone." Naomi's expression shifted. "Who?" The older woman frowned, as if searching through fog. "I do not know. I almost remember." Silence settled between them. Then Naomi pulled the photograph from her pocket and glanced at it briefly before placing it face down beside her chair. This time the camera angle was different. Just enough. Adrian leaned forward. His pulse quickened. He could finally see part of the image. A woman, older, smiling, standing beside a younger Naomi. Mother and daughter. The realization struck him instantly. The photograph was not merely a memory. It was the reason. Suddenly, everything connected. The songs, the patience, the tears, the prayers. Naomi looked at Evelyn and began singing once more. But now Adrian understood that every note carried two people inside it. The mother she had lost, and the mother she was trying to save. 2 nights later, the answer Adrian had been searching for arrived when he least expected it. The mansion was unusually quiet. A storm had rolled across the lake during the evening, leaving behind heavy clouds that covered the moon. Shortly before midnight, Adrian found himself unable to sleep. He walked the hallways alone, passing family portraits and silent rooms filled with memories. As he approached the small library near the west wing, he noticed a faint light beneath the door. Curious, he stepped closer. Inside, Naomi sat alone at a reading table. A single lamp illuminated the room. The photograph rested beside an open notebook. She did not see him standing in the hallway. For several moments, Adrian simply watched. Naomi was writing something carefully, pausing now and then as if choosing each word with great care. Then she stopped. Her eyes drifted toward the photograph. Slowly she reached out and touched it. "I miss you, Mom," she whispered. Adrian froze. The words were soft, barely audible, but they carried enough emotion to fill the entire room. Naomi closed her eyes. "I still wake up at 3. The notebook remained open before her. Adrian could not see everything written on the pages, but he noticed dates. Dozens of them, neatly organized. Some stretched back years. Naomi wiped a tear from her cheek and took a slow breath before closing the notebook. Only then did Adrian quietly step away before she noticed him. Back in his study, he could not stop thinking about what he had heard. At 3 o'clock that morning, he watched the monitor again. Naomi entered Evelyn's room exactly as she always did. But tonight Adrian noticed details he had missed before. The way Naomi smiled before speaking. The way she adjusted Evelyn's blanket. The way she listened more than she talked. None of it felt like duty. It felt personal. Halfway through the song, Evelyn suddenly opened her eyes and stared directly at Naomi. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn reached out and touched Naomi's cheek. "You loved her very much, did not you?" she asked quietly. Naomi's singing stopped. Adrian sat forward in his chair. A long silence followed. Naomi looked genuinely startled. "Who?" she asked softly. Evelyn smiled. "Your mother." Naomi's eyes filled instantly. "Yes," she whispered. "Very much." Evelyn nodded slowly, as though the answer confirmed something she already knew. "I can tell." The room grew still. Even through the camera, Adrian could feel the emotion hanging in the air. Then Evelyn said something that neither Naomi nor Adrian would ever forget. "The people we love never really leave. Sometimes they just borrow someone else's voice." Naomi lowered her head. Tears slipped silently down her face. Yet for the first time since Adrian had started watching these nightly visits, she did not look sad. She looked understood. And as the old woman gently squeezed her hand, Adrian realized that the healing inside that room was no longer moving in only one direction. The next evening brought an unexpected change. It began shortly after dinner when Evelyn refused to eat. No amount of encouragement worked. Caregivers tried gently. Nurses offered alternatives. Even Adrian sat beside her for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing helped. Evelyn simply stared out the window, distant and withdrawn. "I am tired," she kept saying. "Tired of forgetting." The words lingered in the room long after she spoke them. Adrian felt helpless. Once again, that feeling had become far too familiar. Then Naomi quietly entered carrying a small tray. There was nothing special about it. A bowl of soup, a few crackers, a cup of tea. Yet when Evelyn saw her, something softened immediately. "There you are," the older woman said. Naomi smiled. "I heard somebody was giving everyone a hard time tonight." A faint laugh escaped Evelyn. The first one all day. Naomi sat beside her and began talking about ordinary things. The garden, the changing leaves. A robin she claimed had been stealing berries near the fountain. Within minutes, Evelyn started eating. Not because someone instructed her to, because she felt comfortable, safe, seen. Adrian watched the exchange from across the room. For the first time, he noticed the staff watching too. Not with surprise, with admiration. As though everyone in the mansion had quietly recognized something he was only beginning to understand. Later that night, shortly before 3 o'clock, Adrian did something he had never done before. Instead of watching through the monitor, he walked upstairs. The hallway was silent except for the distant hum of the heating system. Soft light spilled beneath Evelyn's door. Adrian stopped outside. He could hear Naomi singing inside. The familiar melody drifted through the quiet. Darkness. He remained there for several minutes, listening. Then he heard his mother's voice, clearer than it had been in weeks. "What was your mother's name?" Evelyn asked. The singing stopped. A pause followed. "Grace," Naomi answered softly. Her name was Grace Carter. Evelyn smiled. "That sounds beautiful." Naomi looked down at the photograph resting in her hands. She was. Silence settled over the room. Then Evelyn surprised them both. Do you know what I think? Naomi shook her head. I think she would be proud of you. Adrian closed his eyes. Something about those words struck deeper than he expected. Inside the room, Naomi stared at the blanket for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled slightly. I hope so. Evelyn reached over and squeezed her hand. I know so. The room became completely still. No confusion, no fear, no illness. Just two women sharing a moment neither of them fully understood. Standing outside the door, Adrian realized something extraordinary. For 42 nights, he believed Naomi had been saving his mother from loneliness. But now he saw the truth. His mother had been saving Naomi too. And somewhere between grief and memory, between loss and healing, both women had found something neither had expected to find again. Peace. 3 mornings later, Adrian made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested breakfast in the sunroom instead of his private office. More importantly, he asked for 3 place settings instead of 2. When Naomi arrived carrying a tray of fresh fruit and coffee, she stopped in the doorway. Evelyn was already seated beside the window, wrapped in a light cardigan, watching sunlight dance across the lake. Adrian stood as Naomi entered. The gesture was small, but it caught her completely off guard. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn smiled. There you are, she said warmly. We have been waiting for you. Naomi glanced toward Adrian, uncertain whether she belonged there. Adrian answered the question before she could ask it. Please sit down. Slowly, she took the empty chair. The morning felt different from any that had come before. Not because Evelyn suddenly recovered. The illness was still there. Some memories remained lost. Some confusion remained unavoidable. But there was also laughter, conversation, comfort, things that had been missing from the mansion for a very long time. After breakfast, Evelyn grew tired and returned to her room for a nap. Naomi stood to leave as well. Miss Carter. Adrian's voice stopped her. She turned. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Not as an employer studying an employee. Not as a powerful man addressing a member of staff. Just as one human being speaking to another. I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked in surprise. Sir. Adrian folded his hands. For 42 nights, I watched you walk into my mother's room. Her eyes widened. You knew? Every night. Naomi looked down at the floor. I hope I did not overstep. Adrian shook his head immediately. No. I think I spent too much time believing you were helping my mother. He paused. I understand now that something else was happening too. The room fell quiet. Naomi's eyes glistened. Neither of them needed to explain further. Some truths had already spoken for themselves. Adrian reached into a folder resting on the table and slid a document toward her. Naomi hesitated before opening it. Her breath caught. It was not a contract. Not exactly. It was an offer. A permanent position overseeing Evelyn's care and well-being, with a salary that would change Naomi's life. But that was not what made her emotional. The final paragraph did. It described her not as household staff, but as an essential member of the family's support system. Naomi read it twice. Then a third time. Sir, I do not know what to say. Adrian smiled faintly. Say yes. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. Across the hallway, sunlight streamed through the open doorway of Evelyn's room. Somewhere inside, the older woman was sleeping peacefully, perhaps dreaming, perhaps remembering, or perhaps simply resting without fear. For the first time in years, the mansion no longer felt like a place haunted by loss. It felt like a home. And on a quiet morning beside Lake Michigan, Adrian Castellano finally understood something money, influence, and power had never taught him. The greatest acts of love are often the ones performed when nobody expects recognition. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.